Hello, everyone. My name is Jordan Lee. I teach 10th grade geometry, and the title of the lesson that we are discussing today is Parallel and Perpendicular Lines Exploration. I teach a total of 147 students. Of those students, 64 are female and 83 are male. My students are a pretty diverse group with a racial breakdown of 53% white, 25% Black or African American, 10% two or more races, and 12% Hispanic and Latino. Within the 6 sections of geometry that I teach, there are 2 classes that are co-taught, with 11 students that have disabilities receiving student-specific accommodations and modifications. The school that I teach at is a rural school with a diverse demographic. We are a transient school, which the National Institute for Urban School Improvement defines transient students as any learner who changes schools 6 or more times in their K through 12 careers, or for some, those who change schools 3 times through 3rd grade. This would include children of migrant workers, children experiencing homelessness, even if it's just briefly, children in foster care, children living in high poverty, and children in military families. So our students come from all backgrounds and cultures. The lesson that was taught was in Unit 5 of Geometry, and I chose to plan a lesson implementing technology in the HRL framework to teach the slope criteria of parallel and perpendicular lines. From the Georgia Standards of Excellence, the standards being addressed in this lesson is MGSE 9 through 12.G.GPE.5, which says to prove the slope criteria for parallel and perpendicular lines and use them to solve geometric problems. The academic language is as follows. The language function was to explore and apply the properties of slopes to graph parallel and perpendicular lines, and to explain when 2 lines are parallel, perpendicular, or neither based on their slopes. The vocabulary covered in this lesson are parallel, perpendicular, slope, y-intercept, slope-intercept form, point, line, and opposite reciprocal. Materials needed for this task is a Chromebook, which is provided, internet access, as students need to be able to access Google Classroom and Desmos.com, and the activity handouts and links to the student activities. The technology standards chosen for this lesson is students use technology to seek feedback that informs and improves their practice and to demonstrate their learning in a variety of ways, and students build knowledge by actively exploring real-world issues and problems, developing ideas and theories, and pursuing answers and solutions. The standards of mathematical practice chosen is standard 1, make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. And 5, use appropriate tools strategically. Now, this was a 2-part lesson. The first part was just having students explore the slope criteria using Desmos. And the second part incorporated the HRL framework, which we will talk about briefly. And students were asked to find examples of parallel and perpendicular lines within their own personal lives and bring in examples to share with the class in order to give a glimpse of their own background and culture and tie it back to the math that we were learning. As far as their identities, this is how how your teaching will help students to learn something about themselves and or others. So for this specific lesson, the identity is that students will use personal experiences, backgrounds, and culture to identify examples of parallel and perpendicular lines in their daily lives. The skills are basically what skills and content learning standards are you teaching? For this specific lesson, students will be learning about the various real-world applications of parallel and perpendicular lines. For intellect, this is what your students will become smarter about. For this lesson, students are learning about the experiences, backgrounds, and culture of their peers by engaging in conversations about the real-world applications of parallel and perpendicular lines and what their own personal examples mean to them. And lastly, criticality is how you will engage your students thinking about power, equity, and anti-oppression in society and in the world. For this lesson, our criticality component was how does the concept of parallel and perpendicular lines compare or differ in various cultures around the world. I used various texts for my research, as you can see those cited at the bottom of the slide. For assessment during this lesson, we used a couple of different formative and summative assessment tools here. The first assessment was a ticket out the door given on the first day of the lesson, where students were tested over how well they picked up the SLOPE criteria from the exploration of the activity. There were also explain your thinking questions throughout the activity. There was a card sort embedded within the Desmos activity that grades automatically to provide some immediate feedback for the teacher. And then on the second day, when students shared their examples of parallel and perpendicular lines, there was a class PowerPoint presentation where each student shared their examples. And at the end, there was a discussion board where students were to share 3 things they learned about their classmates throughout the activity. The impact of the technology was that it provided students with a visual of parallel and perpendicular lines and hands-on discovery of SLOPE criteria. The Desmos technology also provided instant feedback when graphing, so students were able to tell if their lines were parallel or perpendicular based on the equation that they typed in, and if something didn't look right, they were able to adjust immediately. And last, the technology was easy for the teacher to monitor student progress. The impact of the HRL framework is that students showed growth in understanding and appreciating each other's backgrounds and cultures. The students were able to identify math in their lives through real-world examples, and the students engaged in meaningful conversation with teachers and peers. As far as closing remarks go, I plan to continue implementing technology-based lessons within my classroom as much as possible due to the positive effect these activities have on student learning and engagement. There are tons of tools and resources for educators out there, and I'm committed to continue researching and implementing new tools and technology with my students to prepare them for the world outside of secondary education. I am also committed to continue learning about how to implement culturally responsive lessons and the HRL framework into my classroom as much as possible in order to revolutionize teaching and learning in mathematics. I recognize that I still have a long way to go, but I am appreciative of the knowledge and perspective gained throughout this process. As the unexpected school closures began due to the recent COVID-19 pandemic, I have felt a sense of peace in being able to implement lessons for the digital learning days that lie ahead of educators and students. Although this is an unprecedented time, I have confidence in implementing technology in order to keep my students engaged, and my students are familiar with technology such as Desmos so that they are able to still receive a quality education and learn new material. As we continue to teach our students digitally for the remainder of the school year, it is crucial that teachers are not only implementing effective lessons via technology that will enhance student learning, but also that we are trying to maintain equity and culturally responsive learning the best that we can in an attempt to reach all of our students. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation.